A word of warning, this podcast explores graphic and disturbing stories and includes some strong language. It therefore may not be suitable for our young listeners or other folks who may find it disturbing. Hello and welcome to a special edition of True Crime Daily, the podcast. I'm your host, Ana Garcia. Everyone in the world of true crime has a story to tell about a case they worked on or that they lived through. Some are high profile, some you have never heard of, but they are all fascinating. Today's case is about how a young mother of two with a cute little pixie haircut managed to fool the world into believing that she was dying of cancer in order to con people into giving her money. This went on for years. Prosecutors say that her blog and her social media were filled with fake photos of her pretending to be sick and getting treatments. She even shaved her head to make it look like chemo had taken her hair. The woman was ultimately busted by the IRS in 2019 and charged with wire fraud. This case is the subject of a new podcast called Scamanda, the story of Amanda C. Riley and how she used social media to commit this fraud on kind, giving people, many of whom had lost loved ones to cancer themselves. Here's a clip from the podcast.
She was putting out this blog like a couple times a week. And it was really like a soap opera. It was very easy to get sucked into the writing of it.
I'm a stage 4 refractory blood cancer patient.
She had very little time to live. 2 beautiful young boys, very undeserving.
It was so much back and forth. You're healed, and then you're back, and then you're healed, and then you're back.
Terminal miracle, terminal miracle.
So a lot of us did donate money.
I prayed for her every single night. I thought good intentions could save her.
I received an anonymous email. They basically said there's someone out there you need to know about. And if you could do anything about it, you should. They served a search warrant on the house. Hey. They have guns, they have SWAT.
I received a notification from the Department of Justice. It was shocking to say the least.
Listen to Scamanda now, wherever you get your podcasts.
Scamanda, the podcast, is produced by Lionsgate Sound and 2 amazing journalists, Nancy Moscatiello and Carlie Webster, who join me now. Welcome, ladies. I'm so excited that you're here.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Are we?
Oh my gosh. I mean, some of you may recognize Nancy. She's been on the podcast before. Nancy and I have worked together for years. Nancy's like an incredible true crime producer. Carlie, you are an amazing journalist. You work here, you work overseas. You've covered some of the biggest cases in the world. So putting you 2 together is like perfection.
Thank you. I think that's so kind. I don't know what you think, Nancy, but I think us together are like, we're definitely like the dog with the bone.
Oh, and you're dangerous. You're perfect and you're dangerous. Both of you are. This case, to me, is unbelievable because here is a person who, it's hard for us to believe that someone would pretend to have cancer, that someone would pretend to share the worst parts about what it is to fight cancer. To do this in such a public way, we're always like sucked in by people like this. I do believe people are good-natured, and I do believe people want to help, which is probably why Amanda got away with this for as long as she did. Nancy, how could you investigate a case that is so complicated because of, HIPAA laws and things like that? How can you even prove that someone doesn't have cancer?
Well, yes, that it's really extremely difficult. And just like you said, you don't want to believe that in anybody, right? So when you get the tip or you get the information that, oh, no, this is what someone's doing, you have to reset and try and look at it through a different lens. And then you maybe genuinely want to look at somebody. And, that's hard to do. It's not a comfortable place to go to think, wow, yeah, someone can be so vile, right? So it's a very slow, tedious process because no one wants to believe it. And getting to the ears of people to say, no, I think this is what she's doing. it's just not a comfortable position to be in.
Carlie, isn't this like a classic fraud case? Because it's always the scam. Yeah. Based on someone in trouble who plays on our goodness and our good nature.
That's such a good question, because I'm not actually sure it really is. Because one thing that I find, look, when Nancy first contacted me, I questioned Nancy. No offense, Nancy. I love Nancy. But I questioned her. And then I started to get sucked in. And I don't see myself as I think we have this thing where, oh no, a lot of I'm going to call them victims because they were listed as that in the case. We're like, I don't understand. I'm not naive. And we blame ourselves, right? And I'm not naive, but I was going through the blog posts of Amanda, who is Scamanda. And I was like, no way. There's pictures of her in hospital. It's just so detailed, so convincing, and so out there. And to go to your question is, I don't think so, no, because even when the heat got turned up, the heat got on her and then got turned up, she made it even more public. She didn't hide away. She didn't run away. She went forward, and she then accused Nancy of things. And Nancy can speak to that because I know it became very personal for Nancy. But then she actually thought she was cleverer and better, and maybe that is typical, than the police, than the IRS, than Nancy, than any of her people that she was manipulating. But I think what is typical about it is, so it's not about the money really, and I don't think it necessarily was for her. Mm-hmm. It's the manipulation, the emotional abuse that I think underpins this, that maybe is typical. And your opening was wonderful, Anna, because you said she's got this pixie haircut, she's cutesy. And there you go. She's not this monster that we think criminals are. She's lovely. She's polite. She's charming. She's beautiful. She's empathetic. She connects with you. She understands you. And you can see how easy it was for her to convince people to help her.
Oh, yeah. It's like they say, it's never the crime, it's the cover up, know. And another thing, she's not the first person to fake cancer and collect money, right? You do hear about it a lot. But
crazily.
Yeah, right. You would not think it, but it's becoming, unfortunately, something that's more common. And in most situations, when you read about those cases, it's, Sheriff Bob goes down and says, knock, knock. Hey, Amanda, we hear you're doing this. Do you have cancer? Oh, my God, I don't. I'm so sorry. I didn't, That's not Amanda Riley. Amanda Riley, just like Charlie said, as people maybe question or things kind of heated up, it was even more aggressive and more public after that. She didn't pull back.
Right. She doubled down. She doubled down. So I just want to catch everyone up, and then you're going to take us deep into this story. So we're talking about Amanda C. Riley here. And in May of 2022, Amanda, who was 37 at the time, was sentenced to 5 years in prison after she pleaded guilty to one count of wire fraud. Now, federal prosecutors say that the scam began somewhere in 2012, approximately in San Jose, California. And at least 349 people have been identified by the authorities as victims, people who were swindled by her. And the government puts the fraud at about $100,000. But you all believe it's far more than that.
Yeah. Well, the reason why is factually, it's not even a believe, is because they only included what was sent over the wires, hence wire fraud. So it was what was done on the internet, online. But so many people gave cash donations. They gave in-kind donations through food, through babysitting, through one woman we found even gave her own plasma. So all the cash, which we know there was so much cash that was given, wasn't actually included, and they weren't included as victims.
So what do you think the ballpark is here, Nancy?
So for me, I know during the investigation, each time because she thanked a lot of people for a lot of money and a lot of things, right? So just in tallying up what was thanked and not wire donations I was up to about 80,000 at one point before, because I couldn't see obviously what was coming in through her support page. So just from what she publicly thanked and from what was reported, even through some people saying, I gave 3,000 or I gave. So yeah, I was up to almost about 80, give or take. And then more came in after that she thanked people for different fundraisers. So,
And then people gave her trips,
said,
right? Right. People would give her trips, not just supposedly to get treatment, but just like, how like with these different charities that make wishes come through for people who are ill or dying.
Touching upon that. There was, concert tickets, football tickets, first class airfare to 8 trips to New York, that there was a lot of in-kind
Broadway shows.
Yeah. Broadway shows. Charlie mentioned, babysitting, people donated a lot of time, activities for the kids, gymnastics, tennis lessons, swim lessons, it's a lot. It's a lot of very, very good-hearted people.
Yeah, it kills me. The prosecutors say that Amanda Riley falsified medical records, she forged physicians' letters, and that she attacked anyone who challenged her, Nancy being the top person here. She had a blog, and then I'm going to hand it over to you two because I know there's so much for you to tell us here. So she started this blog, Lymphoma Can Suck It. Was that the name of it? Okay. Yeah. And so that was kind of like the beginnings of this to a point, at least the public part of it. So one of you, take us in here and tell us the story about how Amanda began this whole cancer story, which turned out to be completely false.
Go ahead, Charlie, because you tell it so well. Go ahead.
I was like, who's going to go? Who's going to go? How about I start it and then you pick up?
Okay.
Nancy, and then you pick up. So she started this blog, Anna, as you said, called Lymphoma Can Suck It. It was the heyday 2012. It was the heyday of blogs. So there was no TikTok. It didn't even exist. Instagram was kind of starting, and influencers, I don't think was a term. Mm-hmm. But she was the start of the influencer because she created this blog post and she started to journey her own journey, but with such detail and emotion and intimacy. So people all over the world who could relate to her, who were either cancer survivors or currently struggling emotionally as well, not just physically, as many of us have been touched by cancer in some way. And so you can see how people were drawn into that. But then it became her local community too. So she infiltrated the church. So we know that she wasn't going to church before this. So she started going to church at the same time. And we're talking about a mega church. So that means a couple of thousand at least.
Easy, yeah.
So that gave her a platform. So she's got a blog post, she's got her church, and then the actual local community of San Jose and the schools. And then she became a head principal of a school and then infiltrated that school too. So it was these different communities plus the online community of how she started to, but it all came from this blog. And people were, Nancy tells it so well because people were just poured into this blog. As we know from our own experience with social media, it can help you. You can follow somebody's journey. I know amazing people that post about that something they're going through or their trauma, and it can help you feel less alone in your own story, right? And
absolutely.
That's what Amanda did. And so people started to follow her and follow her journey. And she didn't ask for money to start with.
Yeah.
It's like typical, you asked about whether this was typical fraud. I don't think it's typical fraud. I think it's typical abuse because it was bit by bit. So it's the grooming process. And then she started to ask for money when she got your attention.
And that's it, the attention, the amount of attention that she got. And she was the star of her own movie. She had the starring role in this plot that she had written, this narrative. And it's interesting how it's sentencing her brother. I always find this interesting. You know, the person pleads guilty, is sentenced, and yet family, friends, fellow teachers still stand there in the courtroom supporting her.
Not standing. They just wrote letters. No one showed up.
No one showed up. Oh, there you go.
Apart from her mom, dad, and husband.
Yeah.
So to write these letters for someone who has now admitted to the fraud and it has been found out to be a fraud, I always find that interesting. But the point about what you were saying, Charlie, about her craving this attention, Nancy, is that even her own brother, I believe, wrote in one of the letters about how he felt that that was the genesis of it, that she craved attention.
Yeah, and maybe so. I mean, we're finding out more, you know, I've found out so much about her, before she was diagnosed, and now, you know, when I say diagnosed. But I mean, the blog was extremely emotional. It was extremely endearing to who she was. As I said, talking with Charlie for the podcast, like, it was a soap opera because she took you on this journey of, you know, being at her lowest of lows, so many chemos, the sickness, the ailments that go along with that, to the, you know, as we say, you know, terminal miracle, terminal remission. And it's a journey, it's a roller coaster, and you're rooting for her. And I would imagine, you know, the thousands at that church, it's the power of prayer. Like, she pulled in their help by asking for prayers constantly. You know, they gave her a forum at church. She was up on stage almost like a preacher, you know, giving her testimony. So they had so much invested in her. And that's a nice thing, right? So, you know, she had a huge support system.
Explain to me, and I know that your podcast isn't just the crime. Your podcast is about Amanda, the seeds of who she is and how she pulled this off within family and friends. But the one thing that I don't want to reveal too much, because I know in your multi-part podcast you will be revealing so much in detail. But here's the part that I, as a journalist, am fascinated about. How'd she do this? Because she had photos of herself in doctors' offices. She had pictures, right, where she was in a hospital saying she's getting this treatment here and that treatment there. How did she do that? How'd she do that?
What I will say
$1 million
to that
question, right, Nancy?
Yeah, right. It's a full-time job. Let's put it that way. If only she would have gotten a job. You know, think about it. You know, if people you know, or maybe yourself, something happens to you, or you feel faint, you don't feel good, you go to an emergency room, right? Mm-hmm. Emergency room's job is to treat your symptoms and to bring you in and to see what's going on and how you're feeling, right? In an emergency room, in a bed in an emergency room, you can take a lot of pictures of yourself. You lay in there for hours sometimes. You're being wheeled around to different places, right? I fainted. Oh, you're dehydrated. Let me give you an IV. Let's give you some, you know, something for that. Oh, now I have an IV in my arm. Let me take some pictures of that.
Are you saying that she went to hospitals under false pretenses and that she squeezed herself in there and then started taking pictures all for the purposes of saying, but no, really, I'm at so-and-so getting chemo?
Yeah, so she didn't just sit at home and blog about it. She did do all of it. And that's why it was so hard to pin her down, because she did go to hospitals.
She did go to doctors, not oncologists, but I don't feel good. My heart is racing. I have some problems. Oh, let me refer you to a cardiologist. Okay. So, you know, you've been to doctors. Well, you go into a doctor's room, they hook you up to, let me check your heart. You're telling me your heart's racing. They run tests on you. Well, those are a lot of great pictures, you know.
So that's how she pulled off the visuals of her illness.
Okay. I would say, the vast majority. You know, did she ever have, like, I don't know, some kind of, you know, very low type of procedures done in life? And then she saved some pictures, maybe. But she also would wander the halls of hospitals. You know, you can walk around a hospital late at night. You could walk around. You can walk into an MRI room. You'd be shocked at places you can go. and take pictures.
Well, what about the specialists, right? Because she had cancer, then it went into remission. Then when she was pregnant with the second child, didn't the cancer come back again, which was like while she was pregnant? Wasn't that part of the storyline?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes, she went into remission. I think I counted 4 or 5 times.
Oh, yeah.
And the way that when I first started making the podcast and putting it together and writing it, I was like, okay, what's so fascinating about this is the psychological and behavioral element of what she did. And I think it's categorically wrong. And I'm really sorry for everybody she hurt, because it wasn't about the money, I feel. It was about the violation. And again, for anybody that's ever been affected by this. However, the human behavior side of things is fascinating. So I wanted to take listeners on a journey where you kind of get sucked in yourself. And so we played out all the times that she said that she's won, I won, screw you, cancer. And then I've got some bad news. I went to the doctors today and, it's back. And that was the up and down of the story throughout. And yes, she did involve her 2 children.
3 children, her stepdaughter too.
3 children.
Oh, you mean when she pretended that she had cancer while she was pregnant, which of course would be the scariest thing for anyone to hear, that the cancer's back.
Yeah.
And that you're pregnant, because that really limits your ability to get treatment, and the possibility of a baby losing its mom is horrific. Now, I know I'm stuck on this because I'm still trying to figure out how she pulled off. People had to believe her, and it couldn't just be, oh, I have cancer. So that's when the documentation and the visuals come into this. As we've said, she posted all these pictures of her, with a shaved head, and she's in this medical center and that medical center. Now, wasn't part of the scam here that she traveled the country to meet these experts in the area of which she was ill? And Nancy, didn't you track her down to some New York doctor or something?
Yeah. So yes. So, and again, it's this illusion, right? This manipulation. So yeah, she was flying back and forth to New York for a very special clinical trial. She was very careful. She would give information that was very specific about the treatments, but not necessarily name the doctor or name. So you had to kind of figure it out, and that took quite some time. But when I ultimately did, what she was claiming to have done and to be participating in didn't exist. Okay, so I was able to fact check that type of stuff, but she did go there and get a consultation. So you can go, right? You could say, I have Hodgkin's lymphoma. I'm looking for my next treatment. I've heard all about your facility. Please tell me about my options.
Wow, that is so complicated. Like how to prove that this is all false in this world where your medical records and your medical information is so protected in the United States.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, how you worked on this for years, Nancy, for years. How were you able to crack this?
Well, I mean, her blog was key because everything was in her own words and her experience. So the detailed information she did provide is what I focused on. So I focused on the facts, where she ultimately was treated, the type of treatment, the type of drugs, what they cost, what any procedure and things she said she had done and gave very specifics. I was able to fact check through sources at those facilities. And I just kept a very thorough log for probably 18 months at the minimum of that was enough to say, hey, somebody help. This is out of control now, So, and I just like a quick example, she would say, oh, I'm here for my whatever treatment in New York. Okay. So I knew the facility because she had named it at one point. I was in touch with them, right? And I explained to them my situation, sent them the blog. They were not happy to see this. They made that clear to me. though they couldn't say much more. So, basically I was able to say, oh, hey, did anyone come for treatment today that had a lung collapse? And they'd say, absolutely not. We don't have anybody in treatment today. We are not administering that drug this week. So it's things like that where she was claiming, here I am, here's my IV, blah, blah, blah. I could fact check the facts with the facility itself, not about her, just about them in general. Does that make sense?
It does. So while Nancy's working on the facts and trying to disprove much of what is being put out on her blog and in social media, because as the years went by, as Charlie said, there wasn't TikTok then, but as the years went by, Instagram became that much more popular. Everything was changing, and she was growing and changing with it and telling her story in this multi-platform manner. So, Charlie, for you, it's more about the Amanda. Like, what makes her tick? Why is she like this? What is it about her journey? Like, Nancy sees it from obviously a very factual way. And Charlie, I feel like you're seeing it as, okay, let's talk about this criminal. Let's talk about this convicted criminal. What are the seeds? Where are the demon seeds here of this criminal?
Yeah, and just listening to you made me realize why I think we're so good together, Nancy and I, because Nancy is so tenacious. I mean, as am I, but in a different way, right, Nancy? So I think Nancy's like fact. My brain it is much more of the emotional, empath, creative side. So I find her so fascinating, and her motivations of why she did this and how she got, I don't want to sound like I'm being empathetic towards her, but how she got sucked into this whole thing. Because interestingly, listening to Nancy speak about, Nancy, look, at the end of the day, I really truly believe that the only reason why this woman stopped so far and is in prison is because of Nancy, because people shut the door on Nancy so many times, and she pursued, and I don't want to speak for Nancy, but it became very personal for her because Amanda then targeted Nancy. But for me, she could have stopped and got away with this. Even when the police first contacted her, they spoke to her. She went to the police station without giving too much away and went, here you go, here's my medical letters. So she offered them up. If she'd have walked away then and stopped, she wouldn't have gone to prison. They wouldn't have been able to carry on the investigation. There was so many times she didn't stop when she was given the opportunity to. She knew Nancy was pursuing her. She knew Nancy was watching everything she did. When the police first started looking at her, she just pushed more, and she knew they were watching her. So what is it about a person that does that? That's what I think is so fascinating. And even now, I've been in contact with her, and she thinks Nancy is the enemy. She actually called her the enemy. Nancy's the vindictive one. And she even questioned, I came at this without making Nancy seem as if she's not independent. Like I came at this, Nancy did all this amazing fact checking and went after Amanda way before she met me. And then I got involved, and then I came at it as a storyteller and more of an independent journalist. But she thought I was hired by Nancy. And initially I was like, I'm not on anybody's side. I'm looking at this from I'm an independent journalist. I can't lie about anything. And I'm a storyteller. That's how I approached it. And she thought that I was hired by Nancy or the ex-wife, which we haven't touched upon.
Yeah, we should touch upon that.
The ex-wife, sorry, I should say her name because she's a wonderful person, Alita, who is the ex-wife of Amanda's husband, who I'm sure we're going to get onto shortly. So yeah, it was much more of a, when you listen to it, you said she got convicted. We went to her sentencing, which again was another story in itself because it was so bizarre, which we can talk about in a minute if you want. It was totally bizarre. I was like being an observer, and in the podcast, I try and play that out again because it was bizarre to watch. And her reaction was bizarre to watch. Again, going to your point about the psychological, emotional side. But again, when you listen, I mean, honestly, I've listened to those episodes I no exaggeration, I say at least 300 times each trying to put them together. And I still get drawn in, and every time I listen, and I wrote the damn thing.
So, all right. I think Charlie's kind of led us into this direction of the investigation and a little bit more about her and how this happened. So, yeah. Nancy, this came in as a tip. And so at what point in Amanda's fraud does the tip kind of come in? How long had she been perpetrating the fraud when someone in her world is like, you know what? We got to do something about this. So give us that time frame.
So at the time I got an anonymous email. I was looking for cases and stories because I do that all the time, right? You know, Anna, right. We've worked hundreds of stories together. And I had gotten an anonymous email that said, hey, there's a woman, Amanda C. Riley. Here's her blog. Here's her, Facebook, a blog. This is who she is. And she's faking cancer, and I know it. And can you do something about it? Can you help? What can you do? If you can do anything, you should, right? And that was in like 2015. So she had already been blogging for about 3 years.
Okay. But so I was just to interrupt. There's a twist in that. But because what I saw Nancy's face, and I was like, she's not going to give it. There's a twist in that. We found out more stuff. Like
yeah.
But that's going to be in the podcast, not to be shared now. Okay. We'll close that door.
Yeah, it's amazing what, a little shining a light on something like this when more people come out of the woodwork. So
put it that way.
So I had my initial launch off was 3 years worth of blog already.
Okay.
And so, which was great. I was like, okay. And again, it's a soap opera.
Did you believe it, Nancy? At what point, Nancy, did you say, because, I get these all the time. People reach me through social media or through my website. Please look into this case. Please look into this case. Right. And I try my best to look into the ones I can. But there's a point in which a journalist says, right?
Well, yeah. So reading it at face value, my initial reaction was, this woman's dying. Like, woo, this person's
very sick.
Come on. Like, she's dying, right? This is sad. This is, there's monitors and babies and, I survived and, celebrations and then yes, it was very difficult to start saying. So I had to really think about, well, first, like you said, what do I do? How do I start fact checking that? And at the time, my own sister passed away from cancer very young. She had 2 young children. Looking at those photos and reading Amanda's journey, it was all too real. I mean, I lived it with my sister, right? So it was extremely relatable to me. Mm-hmm. And then I reread it and I looked again, and she started naming, procedures or drugs that I knew. I went through with my sister. So I knew how to do the research. I knew how to explore clinical trials because I had done it for her, So I had that bit of knowledge. And then when I started say, okay, this woman is supposed to, be faking this. Let me look at it through different lenses. I was able to start picking out some nuances that I felt like, oh, okay, I don't remember that with my sister. I don't remember that. And so I contacted a dear friend of mine that actually helped with my sister find clinical trials. That's what she does. That's her job. She places patients with that. And so I said, listen, will you look at this blog with me? Would you redline anything that stands out to you so I know like what direction to look at? And she was kind enough. She was like, absolutely, Nancy, I'll take a look at it. And so, she was an expert at that. So she looked at it. She sent me notes and she said, right here, this drug combination, this isn't a trial. This doesn't exist. Those are your jumping off points. So, it was kind of this battle within myself. And I know I've said it before in talking with Charlie, it's like my sister, couldn't choose to have cancer, right? Nobody can choose to have cancer. This woman chose it, and it just made me infuriated, right? And it just disgusted. It lit that fire that I was like, yeah, we're not doing this. We're taking her down if that has to happen. Because I just felt like it wasn't fair. And also, the more I looked into it, I pulled court records, things that she was involved in. And looking at that, it painted a picture that I was like, oh, this goes beyond just faking cancer. I mean, her and her husband they were involved in a custody battle that I pulled court papers on. And I really felt like they were very disingenuous to the courts and to that woman and her daughter. So, and that's where Alita came into it. I eventually reached out to her to kind of get some background and to understand more about who Amanda and her husband were.
So Nancy, you've been working on this for years and years, and we're going to get to that point, but I just want to jump to Charlie for a second. Yeah. So Charlie, while Nancy's doing all of this, can you just give us an idea of where Amanda fits in, like married with children, like give us that picture that we're missing here because we haven't had a chance to talk about that.
Yeah, so that's the other element to this. You've got the wire fraud, you've got the blogs and the influencer side of it, the infiltration of the community, the church. But then there's a family element of what she did. And there was a big family element. And that's how we actually start the podcast to set the scene around it. So she, at the time when Nancy starts looking into her and she gets this anonymous tip from her source, who, by the way, still remains anonymous because she was scared about what Amanda would do to her. So that just puts to perspective of the other side of this woman. She was married and she had a child who is her stepdaughter, so the daughter of her husband, who she called bonus.
A bonus child.
Yeah, bonus daughter. No, bonus daughter to everyone and to her face. So she was her bonus daughter.
So Amanda is married to a man named Corey. And Corey had a child from a previous marriage.
Mm-hmm. But they were not divorced. They were they were divorced, but going through a custody battle of the child when Amanda and Corey were married. Now, I'm going to give it away because it's so good. Also awful. She actually... How can I explain this? She was actually part of that home and that marriage, but she was brought in by the wife to help another daughter who was going through cancer when Amanda was only a 17-year-old to come and help her with extracurricular activities. And she ends up with the husband.
That's an old story.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
So she ends up with Corey, and then they marry, and they have 2 children, correct?
Correct.
Yes.
Together, they have 2 children.
Yeah, they had 2 biological boys, and then they had the stepdaughter, Jessa, who she called her bonus daughter, and she fought for custody over her. And as Nancy said, Nancy looked into she pulled the court, basically, records from that custody battle. And she was using her cancer to be able to try and get custody of the poor child.
Yeah, it's once Amanda, married Corey, that wasn't enough. She wanted that life. She wanted Jessa also. She didn't want there to be any type of co-parenting for whatever reason in her mind.
So Jessa, and for people who are trying to follow here, Jessa is the biological daughter of Amanda's new husband, Corey.
Yeah.
And Alita, yes.
And Alita. Okay, so
and
this is like a family drama as well.
Right,
yeah.
right.
So when I was trying to kind of get to know who everybody was, I reached out to Alita. I did it very vaguely and very like, hey, I'm, trying to learn a bit about your ex-husband and his wife. I know she's battling cancer. And my approach as a journalist, at that point, there was a lot of tweeting and Instagram things of church members and friends trying to get Amanda on various TV shows because they wanted, Ellen, she's a mom of 2. She needs your help. People were calling out her and her sickness and, to get support. Right. So I was saying, I looked into the due diligence of who she is. And I mean, Alita couldn't have been more gracious. She said, I have nothing. I'm going through a horrible situation with them, but I will not say anything horrible about them because she is dying of cancer. And, that comes first. And all I can do is, make sure I get as much time with my daughter as possible. So, she was just so genuine in wanting to protect her daughter. And she had such a big heart about what Amanda was going through, because her other daughter, she has other children as well, went through a cancer battle. So she knew what they were up against. And she felt terrible. She was big enough to put her own horrible custody battle in the background so that they could heal with this cancer they were dealing with.
So then, Nancy, as you're working this case and you're working this for years, at what point once you realize, wait a minute, I believe that there's genuine fraud going on here, this is a scam, and I believe that's when you came up with the name Scamanda. Brilliant name. When did the police or the authorities become involved? And did that in itself, was that a difficult process?
Yeah, so when I felt comfortable enough and I've talked to enough people, and by then even my source was willing to talk to authorities because there was some key information from them. Once I was able to get a couple of things together, and then my extensive information, I reached out to what's called San Jose Police Department, because that's where she was from, and it was a financial fraud division, and that was a Detective Martinez. And I left many messages. I left, so I'm like, you have to call me, please, just give me a minute, And then I emailed him very thorough information and all neatly packaged to try and, make it simple, to kind of get the gist of it right away. And a couple of weeks went by, and then he finally called me and said, listen, this is tough. I'm a one-man department. He explained a lot of things to me, and he said, but let me take a look. Let me see what this is. And then from there, he got back to me. He's like, I'm in. Let me see what I can do. And he could take it, to a point. And when we talked to him at length in the podcast, and he explains how and what he was able to do and to get to a certain point. But he did talk with Amanda, like Charlie said. He had a back and forth with her.
Nancy, did you ever speak with Amanda?
Well,
yes, you did.
Eventually in court, yes. But before that, no, I spoke to an attorney that was vaguely representing her at one point, and I left one voicemail for her, offering her to speak to me at any time.
Right, because as you're investigating this, once you figure out what the case or the story is, as investigative reporters, as all of us are, and for those of you who aren't, that's generally what you do. You first have to figure out, is there something there that's potentially suspicious? You look for the supporting documentation for it. And then you always have to go to the person who is central to the case or the investigation to give them ample opportunity to respond, to explain, all of these things. You can't just not include that person in your conversation. But right. She knew who you were. You got on her radar, but she refused to ever sit down and say, Nancy, let me explain to you. I have cancer. Right. She never did that.
Yeah, absolutely. And what she digested and took away from it was that Alita, the ex-wife, hired me to spread lies, right? So there was never, someone's on to me. That's not what she put out there. What she put out there was the ex-wife was a horrible individual who was trying to ruin her.
Wow.
And she ruined the ex-wife's life, basically.
But she have to understand. To add to that, and then could carry on, Nancy, because just to add to that, so everybody understands, that was the narrative she was already putting out there to get custody of the child, right? So she was already, that wasn't a new narrative. She was already spinning that narrative so she could get custody of her stepdaughter, called her bonus daughter, Jessa, and that narrative already existed. So then when Nancy came along, she just plugged that into the narrative. Well, look, I told you what this ex-wife is doing. Now she's got this this, what did she call you initially? Like a reporter?
Reporter. She hired this woman.
Hired this woman. To now do this to me. So you can see how it worked, because
I'm not only dying of cancer, but now I have this.
Was already there. Yeah.
Now I'm being attacked on top of it.
And in a way, what Nancy did at that time was gave Amanda proof, in a way. If Amanda could spin that lie, that was just more proof that look at what the ex-wife's doing to me. She's now telling me I'm lying, and look at me, I'm dying. You can see I'm dying. I've got a shaved head. Look at all my pictures. So in a way, it just fueled her continuation, right?
And in that process, Alita's life was destroyed. I mean, imagine you're trying to co-parent. You want to go to your daughter's recital or game, and you are now vilified. They don't want you at the school. They don't want you signing her out of school because you are this horrible person that is doing this to this woman dying of cancer. So this poor woman, it's so much more than just a money grab. It's a horrific tale of what this woman was able to do.
So as the years go by and the investigation progresses, and it becomes a case much bigger than anything that the San Jose Police Department can do, because there are potentially federal crimes that are involved. So how does this case then get on the radar, or how does it moves from San Jose to the IRS?
Yeah, that was. So in talking with Detective Martinez, he was able to make some key leaps, which was fantastic. And he was getting a bit frustrated. I was getting a bit frustrated. Again, it's his investigation. I wasn't doing his work. But of course, I'm sitting there waiting for just arrest her, So there's a little bit of that. But my father-in-law was a retired IRS agent, and so I talked to him about a bunch of different cases I've worked on in the past, and I've done cases profiling the great work of IRS cases. And so we were talking, and he just looked at me and he says, Nancy, that's wire fraud. He said, you should contact the local IRS department. I said, what do you mean? He said, she is getting funds over the internet. She has a website. She's getting the donations. That's the wire. This is all wire fraud. Whatever she is collecting on that end, he goes, that's a unique one for the IRS. You should reach, give it a go. You should reach out to someone. So I talked to Detective Martinez and I said, hey, here's what I'm going to do. Everything I sent you and all that, I'm going to do the same. I have a couple of contacts at the IRS from stories I've done. I'm going to send it out. He was like, go for it too. And he had worked a bit with the IRS on some cases, and he said, yeah, let's do it. That's great. So that's what we did. I sent it on its way. I would say, let's see, almost 5 months went by of crickets, and I was leaving messages and hey, hello, come on. And then my phone rang one day, and Special Agent Arlette Lee said, she's like, I'm so sorry I haven't gotten back to you. I've had a lot going on in my life. Again, I think a motivating factor, she was dealing with a close family member going through chemotherapy and cancer.
Oh my goodness.
She said, I cannot believe what I'm looking at. I need some time to really delve into this. And if we decide to move forward, the last thing I will be able to tell you is, I'm working this case, and then there's a wall, so because as media and then also her source, there had to be a wall. And so at that point, it was handed over. She had all the information, and then she did her thing.
So
and
now
that was very lengthy, a federal investigation.
Oh.
So they turn everything, they subpoena, medical, they do it all, and they do it all without the person knowing.
That's the amazing part, because, at the heart of the crime here was, did she or did she not have cancer? Because if she had cancer, then, you can do whatever. But if the medical records show that she did not have cancer, or that she'd never been treated for cancer, that would be the crux of the fraud part of this. And the only ones who could actually ever truly get those records legally would be the authorities.
Yeah.
And that's the point about it, is that lying itself isn't
a crime.
Kind of should be. No, lying itself isn't a crime. It's not illegal. So even though she was doing all this to people and lying, it still wasn't necessarily a crime. It's the fact that she got money over the internet, because even the money that we said at the beginning of your show, like the money that people gave her by hand in cash, people threw cash on the stage in church. There's pictures of her with cash at her feet.
That's a great photo. That is a marvelous photo.
Yeah. That photo is on our website, actually, at lionsgatesound.com, if people want to see some of the imagery, because all her blog posts got taken down. So we have them, but they're not actually available on the internet. But we've shown some imagery that we're allowed to on our website. But so it was the fact that they had to connect what she was asking the funds for over the internet to whether it was true or not. That's why it was so hard to technically get, because they had to give the evidence. And then, ironically, the thing that she was putting out there, her blog, became the evidence.
Right,
yeah,
right.
They account for every dollar that came in to support Amanda, because that was her site, and then went into that bank account and where it went. And they painstakingly track all of that. And that's how they get to that point. And, one of the hardest things is that they have grand juries, they have, search, they do a lot, and it takes time. And, just on a personal, for me, having to sit there and watch people continue to give and her continue to solicit and dying and remission, and people, it was horrible. Yeah. Because, and I did, personally, I would reach out here and there, because I was still working it for my own benefit, my own story to be able to tell. Because I thought, I could just drop a couple of hints, by contact this person that just gave $3,000 and just say, so I'm working on this story. Maybe they would say, I won't do that again. Right? No,
because they believed her.
I was not well
you.
Received.
No,
and
you
I
weren't.
feel terrible. It's like I tried. I was, and there was a handful that I was well received by, that were very thankful. They were very saddened and they were very upset, but they then could step back and then take another look and feel confident, in what I was saying or how I was approaching them. And so, I tried. I mean, listen, at one point, I sent a very, like you said, like what a journalist would do, an email to the brothers, because they were the ones that put up the website for her. It was a very extensive thing about my brothers put this website for me. I emailed 2 emails. The first one was, I see there's this website. You're collecting all this money. Here's who I am. Here's what I'm looking into. And here's 10 questions I have about the handling of the money. I never heard from anyone, but I thought at least maybe that would send a light, but to the family to say, hey, maybe take a look at what's going on here. But then 3 or 4 more years kept going, and they were there supporting her, and it was like,
Well, if you genuinely believe that this person has cancer and you're either a good friend of them or related to them, and then Nancy Moscatiello starts bothering you through emails or calls, and you're like, well, wait a minute, who am I going to believe? The person here with the shaved head, who is suffering, and I see her suffering, and I see how it's affected our whole family, versus Nancy Moscatiello, who the hell is she, right? I mean, if you put it from that perspective,
exactly.
What you were asking was like really out of left field. Like, where did this woman come from? Where did she get this idea? And ultimately, Nancy, you were the truth teller in this one, and you were always the truth teller, and people don't always like the truth. It can be especially painful, and in this case it was. So I want to get to the part where 2 things. So because that wall gets erected between whenever you're a working journalist and then the authorities are involved, then, this is, I think, the hardest part about being a journalist. You've got all this great stuff and you think you should be a part of what's going on in the investigation. And they're like, no, you are not a part of this. And we're not going to talk to you for a very long time, which is like, really, guys, I brought you this story. This is how you treat me. And it's just the reality.
Let me explain. The one thing what I continued to do and what I was able to do because it wasn't crossing any boundary was if I came across someone or anything I felt could be helpful, I would just email it off, or I would say to the person, here's the person who's I believe it, here's the person investigating it. Here's their number. Here's their email. If you feel up to it, you may want to talk to them like you talk to me. And I would leave it at that. And then if they reached out eventually to Arlette or to Detective Martinez, great. And so I tried my best in that aspect. Like if I felt there were some key people or even information I found, I always directed it to them without me doing it. Just said, hey, reach out.
You deal.
So that felt good that I could at least try.
You could keep, right.
Yeah.
And then there is this moment. There are many pivotal moments, but there's this one morning at Amanda's house, a pivotal moment when the authorities come knocking with search warrants. And Nancy, as only Nancy can gets a tip, right? That this may possibly be happening. And this is how I end up there. I have just worked on this the tiniest bit over the years. As you know, True Crime Daily has included it in our website when she was finally arrested, when she, was convicted and sentenced and all of that. So that is the only part that I know about this case.
So shall I ask the questions for like 2 seconds?
Sure.
Nancy.
Yeah, there you go.
So Nancy asked Anna to come with her to the raid at Amanda's house. So would you like to both explain what that was like? That's the question.
I always say there's few people I go out for the morning with. Anna's one, and of course there's a couple others. But
Anna's voice, if it's okay to say, Anna, is a little bit in our podcast, because Anna wonderfully explains, and with Nancy, what that moment was like. And then we have Detective Martinez, who was there. He was the police representation running the case, who Nancy initially contacted. And so was Special Agent Arlette Lee. And Detective Martinez explains to us and helps us get into Amanda's head, because he actually sat with Amanda while the raid was going on, which by both of your accounts was very aggressive, and we can hear that, and we have audio of that as well in our podcast. But what I found so fascinating about that moment is Detective Martinez told us that he sat with Amanda while her house was being turned upside down. Imagine what that must be like. I don't know. I'd be anxious. I'd be running all over the place. I'd be like, oh my gosh, what have I done? I'd be so scared.
Right. Your kids are home. It's, before the sun comes up, and all of a sudden it's as you see it on television. They storm your house, every inch of it.
And apparently Detective Martinez told us that she was as calm as you like. Just sat there, nonchalant. So,
am I going to get out on
Martinez
time?
Then? Yeah. You're Amanda C. Riley then? Yeah. So, will the kids be able to get to school then? Maybe, yeah. And that's the conversation that happened. Mind-blowing.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And I don't know if you remember when we were on public streets out in the front, and watching it all go down, and the husband's out front, Corey, with the search warrant in his hand. And, here, what he's saying is, this is all Nancy's fault. This is Nancy. Because, and I think I'm standing there with Anna and I'm just like, oh my God, like they're blaming me. They're what? Like,
and that's the amazing part of this whole story and of the podcast as well, that you all have brilliantly done. And obviously it's not all out yet. It's coming out, in segments, in episodes, is that you become the bad guy.
Yeah.
You become the bad guy, and they get so angry with you. It's not that they're being investigated because it's fraud and this is a scam. It's being investigated because of Nancy Moscatiello, and Nancy is the problem. And in fact, they got really mad at you and went after you.
Yeah. Yeah, they sued me. And mind you, this is after their home's raided, after they know there's a federal investigation. You would think maybe you would go into remission.
Right.
Yeah,
everything's fine. I'm in remission.
Yeah.
We're done.
Yeah. And that was my point earlier when you asked me, Anna, about the psychological appeal to me of this character, of this story, is that she could have stopped, and she could not be in prison right now. She could just be with her family and her 2 kids, biological kids that she's left behind. But instead, she just went after Nancy and Alita, the ex-wife, and said it was they were being vindictive. They had it in for her, and they actually called publicly Nancy the enemy and tried to discredit Nancy, which, I know Nancy comes across as this. Nancy's going to hate this. I'm going to say this. She's going to be like, no. Nancy comes across as this incredibly tough, strong person, which she is. But that's horrible for somebody to try and discredit. Nancy's so experienced as an incredible investigative journalist and producer, reporter, everything. And they tried to discredit her. And that's when I said earlier, it became personal. And that's horrible thing to happen, because people then start to question you.
Well, yeah, it tarnishes, me and my next job, my next whatever. If I was to have something on my record as that, like, that's not okay. That's a problem. And she became very inept in using the court system. Like I said, with the ex-wife, the cancer was in every document you had, from her bankruptcy to the custody. Now, remember, this isn't her daughter. This is her husband's daughter, but somehow in all the court filings, it's about her and her cancer, because the husband, of course, is paying thousands upon thousands a month in a medical hardship. So how could he possibly pay child support? And how could he possibly, right? Okay. So every facet, they used that cancer diagnosis to manipulate the courts. And it worked. The bankruptcy courts were bending over backwards for them to switch the dates. When can you come in? Oh, I have a bone marrow transplant. I mean, there's some stuff we uncovered that's in the podcast, them dealing with the bankruptcy courts, because we were able to get recordings.
Yeah. Wow.
That was wonderful for the podcast. So that's something to look forward to, because, when I pulled those bankruptcy papers, they had $180,000 in debt and not one medical bill. Okay. But they're telling the courts, we are so destitute. We have so much problems because this cancer is costing us thousands a month. I can't even do child support. I can't do that. So, for them to then use it against me, it was working for them. So it was working for them in every aspect.
Were you scared? I mean, were you scared that even though you were right and you had the truth on your side, sometimes that doesn't matter.
It doesn't always work. Yeah. Yeah. I wouldn't say it's not scared. It's you get a self-doubt, and you get that oh shit, am I wrong?
Right. Did I get this wrong? Oh my God.
You question yourself.
Yeah.
And I have plenty of friends that like to, razz me up too and just say, oh, you better hope you're right. My own children, mom, those kids could be orphans. What do you do? Like they try just to get in my head, but it's when it comes to my livelihood, my work, something I love, and I would be, crushed if I couldn't continue doing because of something like this. Yeah, then that's absolutely, scary, if you want to say that.
It is scary. No, I agree with you. I'm always, if I'd ever get called in about something, I'd be like, oh my God, did I misread that? And then of course you didn't, but you're like, you doubt yourself, because if you are an honest and humble human being, you have to accept the possibility that you were fallible. And, but the point is to always, have oversight on things and not be. Okay, so now let's get to the point where she gets arrested. How does this come down? This is like how many years later?
Yeah, so it took federal authorities for, however that system works. They have to wait to see the grand jury. They go through that whole process. From my perspective, it was about almost 4 years, but again, there's
from
things
from the time of the search warrant, it was like another 4 years.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
Wow.
So there was 4 more years of scamming, and it's things move slowly, but also what I learned, administration changes, change U.S. attorneys, change priority of cases. There's a lot of stuff that goes on behind the scenes that, Special Agent Lee had to champion the case, and keep it going and keep it alive and keep it at the forefront in order to be able to move forward to actually then indict. It didn't help that the pandemic was happening at that time.
Right.
So the courts really just slowed down. So there was a lot of that taking place during that time. And it was also the first type of this fraud for an IRS case, at least from what Agent Lee was able to research, because of course it's wire fraud. That's a very generic, but the act of what she did, the cancer, all of that was extremely unique and the first time that they took something like this on. So they wanted to make sure, it was lock barrel, it was solid, so that
there wasn't a cell of cancer in her.
Just that, because it does. I think it's really important because now there's a precedent out there that someone that's trying to pull off something like this at such a high level, especially dollar amounts. There's something to be said that, okay, we know what to do with people like this.
Yeah, and it was the first, just to add to what Nancy said, it is the first and still the only case of its kind by the IRS.
Wow, amazing.
And to show you how good Amanda is with all of this, because it was a federal, IRS. So she just twisted it and started telling everyone, oh my God, all this is that I got all this money from everyone and I didn't pay my taxes on it. That's all this is. So
the people believed her.
I'm just going to pay my taxes and this is going to be cleared up. Ignore the letters that you got saying, hey, you're a victim, Department of Justice just sent out.
They've got it wrong.
Yeah, all that means is I didn't pay my taxes.
Interesting. I didn't realize that spin to it. Yeah. So she's indicted. Wow. So, and then I do recall, just because I'm also friends with Nancy, over the years, Nancy, would send out this text and say, this is the link if because they're back in court, and she had all these changes in attorneys, and then she ends up moving, and wherever I could, I would try to jump on to hear what was going on with the federal case. What ultimately ends up happening from the time that she's indicted, that was yet another long period of time.
Yeah, and that was a lot due to just the slowdown of the courts with COVID. So that just went in, you want to call it in her favor to just slow down the whole situation. But she got indicted in 2020, August of 2020. And I remember reading in one of the court filings, her defense attorney made a point of saying in court that it had taken a great deal of time for his client to come to the realization.
Yeah, he did. because she didn't.
Guilty.
She still didn't.
She wasn't going to plead guilty.
She wasn't going to plead guilty.
She was going to go ahead with a trial.
Yeah, and even her defense lawyer said that in court. And what was so interesting is after we went to the sentencing, so she was indicted and she officially went to prison in September of last year, so 2022, and she was sentenced in exactly a year ago, so May 2022, and I remember after, and I was talking to Nancy, I was like, hang on, she hasn't actually admitted this. So she pled guilty, but even
to the wire fraud.
Yeah. She didn't in her statement, and to nobody, she still hasn't admitted that she lied. So I went to speak to her after the sentencing, and she did speak to me outside afterwards. And then we had some conversations and text message conversations, and then we have had back and forth in prison. And again, I was fascinated because she still hadn't said that she still hasn't said that she hasn't got cancer. She still says that she's not well.
Oh, I believe she's not well. I believe that.
Yeah, she says she's physically, she is, and there's more to it, and she isn't well. And I think it's just fascinating that I think she still believes her own lies.
Yeah, when she finally pled out, there's a process. It's very cookie cutter. And so the judge reads everything about the crime and what you did and blah, blah, blah. And then you have to say yes, right, basically. And so it was very formulaic. You don't she had an opportunity to at that, this is during when you plead guilty, not when you get sentenced. She had an opportunity, she just sat there because I went to that, and so you basically are admitting to the crime, but you're not forced to say, oh, and by the way, oh yes, I don't have cancer. You don't physically say those words, right?
Mm-hmm.
Her full statement that she gave to court, Amanda's full statement, is in the podcast, and it's compelling.
Oh, wow.
It's compelling. And then the judge's response made the whole courtroom gasp.
Ooh.
And that's why.
Okay. Okay, we'll leave that tease there. You're going to have to listen to their podcast. So as part of sentencing, there's restitution, correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Well, are these people ever going to get their money back? Let's be real.
Well, yeah.
She's been ordered to.
Yeah, she's ordered to, and any job, there's rules with it, right? You have to maintain a job when you get, there's things, and they take a percentage. So yeah, they do the best they can, but not the people that paid cash, not the people that, none of that will ever
reminding that. Yeah. So all the people that online, maybe, yeah, but all the other people that we know gave cash or different form
and
of
not just
services.
that, a lot of the people we talk to, it's not about the money. They are so betrayed by it. They just, they feel like there's justice in her being put in jail. Now, for Alita and Jessa, there's no nothing. I mean, Alita lost out on thousands upon thousands of dollars of child support. At one point, she had to pay them child support. She lost out at 1.5 years of losing custody of her daughter.
Does she have a relationship with her daughter?
Oh, yeah. They are as close as can be now.
Okay. All right. So that wasn't a fallout.
And, there's a lot about the daughter. She's a brilliant, smart young woman. And, she catches on to a lot of things during those years. And so we talk about that. She talks about that. But, nothing can get that back for them. The damage was so deep. And honestly, she hasn't, and I spoke to Jessa before doing anything like this, and she said it was okay to share. She has never heard from her father since the sentencing. There was no apology. There was no nothing. There was no, oh my God, I feel terrible. So, all she cares
and all
about
this
is
fighting over custody, and I'm trying to get her, and now that she's an adult, I don't have a relationship with her. Come on, that
So
really ticks me off.
The biggest loss is for them not having Jessa in their life, and she misses her brothers terribly.
I hate
if there's
that.
anything she could change, that's what it would be.
You have to think of the damage that Amanda caused her. I mean, she was just a child and she's getting pulled all over the place, spun all these lies.
You think a parent is dying.
The guilt is wrongly placed, but now she's also left with the guilt because she did have some of these in-kind services, so like the tennis lessons and food and things, and she feels guilty for that. Obviously, totally misplaced. So she's left with let's face it, trauma. And again, she's confided in myself and Nancy, and doesn't mind us saying, because we would never betray her trust, but she's left with this, and she's having to deal with the mental health repercussions of what this has done to her, because this was her upbringing. This was her time where she should have been. This is her learned behaviors. This is her influence. This was her influence as a child. And to be betrayed like that, imagine trying to trust people again.
No, your parents, your dad and your stepmom. Let me ask you this. Amanda, because we're wrapping up here. Amanda is in prison still, correct?
Yes.
And Corey, he's still married to her? They're still married? Is there a divorce? What's happening? You can't say.
Yep. As far as I know, married.
Okay.
And, I'm sure raising the boys.
Wow.
Wow.
We need to be very clear here. Corey has not been implicated, accused, or anything as part of this investigation. This is only Amanda C. Riley that we are talking about. We want to be absolutely clear there. Of course, the question that many people have is, wow, you live with someone and you presumably believe that they have cancer. How does he feel? Is he betrayed? Did he ever figure it out? We don't know, do we? There's no insight into that.
I have my personal insight in it, and how I feel. It's like, you're with someone and married with them since 2010. They got together. They went through, all the blog, social media, telling everyone, he would say, I'm just getting back from chemo. I'm her rock. He went to every appointment with her, according to her, by her side,
But he could have been in the weight room. I mean, there's countless cases especially with women.
You, Anna.
Well, you know what? Why? Because there's this case that I think of all the time. It's a horrific case out of Texas where a woman pretended to be pregnant, and the guy that she convinced that she was, and you're like, how can you be with a woman with a fake belly this whole time? And, the man got on the stand and said, well, I would take her for the appointment. I would sit in the weight room. There was always this explanation, that explanation. She showed him the sonogram, she would get changed in the bathroom or take a shower when he was asleep. Do you see what I'm saying? Because I'm like, how can you not know? But he claims he didn't know.
I think there's lots of photos of them together in hospital and together at chemo. And so
it's not the person's responsibility ever to be like, well, why didn't you know? It's always the responsibility of the person that committed the crime. So I agree with you, and I think it's important to say. And they didn't go after him. They went after her, and it speaks to how people can manipulate. You just gave that example of that case, because manipulation it's so powerful, and coercive control is so powerful.
So let's get to all the details about where you can find this great podcast. We know that the first episode of Scamanda was released on May 15th, and it's 8 episodes, and you take us through the whole arc here. And the episodes will be released how? Because I think when this podcast is released, you'll be in the middle of all your episodes.
Yeah, so as you're listening, it will be the 3rd episode will have just been released, and we have 8 episodes potentially we might have a few more because we found out some things already since its release that we were trying to dig into. So yeah, there's even more than we realized. So we might be dropping some bonus episodes as well. But you can find it wherever you listen to your podcasts, on Apple Podcasts and everywhere else. So make sure you check it out and do follow us because we'll be dropping more into that feed. As we're now uncovering even more, so it never stops.
That's fantastic, and it's called Scamanda. Very easy to find.
Scamanda, yeah.
Scamanda. But you also have a website, you say, Charlie, where people can see some photos and some other things.
Yeah, lionsgatesound.com. We've put some photos on there, so you can see, I suppose, have a visual of what myself and I'm talking about, and but. When you listen, you'll get to hear Amanda's voice through her blog. So you will be taken on the journey and get to hear what her blog posts were like.
Terrific. And what episode can we expect to hear the shocker in court? Where might that fall in? You're not telling me. Okay, that's telling.
No, that's the last episode. So sorry, everyone, because even people now are like, oh my God, I just want to binge this. And I'm like, oh, sorry. Like, it's coming out every week, though. So the last
since I know the podcast was just released, but have you heard from Amanda at all on this yet?
I haven't, but I need to check because we had quite a lot of back and forth recently just before the release. And as of now, she hasn't said no to, so she's spoken to me, but off the record in a way. And we've emailed and text, and we're emailing through a prison email.
Yeah, that whole core links thing. I know.
Yes. And which is interesting. And some of the stuff she says is interesting. Because she said there is more side to the story to this. And so last thing I heard was that she was thinking about speaking to me, but she would let me know.
But Nancy can't be there. I'll talk to you, but not Nancy.
Definitely can't.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you so much, Nancy and Charlie. Honestly, this has been wonderful. I love to have these discussions with fellow journalists, and this is a case that I find so fascinating.
Thank you.
We appreciate it so much.
All right. The podcast is Scamanda, everyone. And you can find this podcast and that podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Also, remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel, to our newsletter. Until next week, this has been a special episode of True Crime Daily, the podcast. I'm your host, Ana Garcia. And as we always say, don't do crime.